It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Some buildings in Indonesia built centuries ago.
Yeah.
They're not just relics.
Right.
They're actually these incredibly smart, sustainable designs really tailored to where they are.
Exactly. Still teaching us things today.
Yeah. You send over some really interesting sources on this coursework journal articles all about Indonesian vernacular architecture. So the idea for this deep dive is to really unpack what makes it so special, right? What can we learn?
Absolutely. And these aren't just, quaint old houses. They embody this deep understanding of living in balance with nature, with culture.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm here to help connect those dots from the sources, kind of dig into that wisdom built right in.
Great. So let's start with the basics. When we say Indonesian vernacular architecture, what are we actually talking about? How do we define it?
Okay, so essentially it's the building style that develops organically, you could say, in a specific region.
Organically?
Yeah, it's heavily shaped by local conditions, the nature, the climate, sun, rain.
Materials available nearby?
Exactly. Materials they can find easily. And of course, the local culture, the traditions passed down.
So not designed by formal architects in an office, but something that grows out of the place itself.
Precisely. It relies on those local materials, local building techniques that people figure out work best over time, generation after generation.
Right.
And in the Indonesian context, you'll often hear vernacular and traditional used pretty much interchangeably. It's like a physical expression of how a community relates to its environment.
And Indonesia, it's vast. Thousands of islands, different cultures. The diversity must be huge.
Oh, it's incredible. That diversity is really one of the most striking things. You've got all these islands, different climates, different landscapes, hundreds of ethnic groups.
Wow.
So each style tells its own story, reflecting very specific local adaptations, cultural quirks.
So it's like a library of design solutions.
It really is a huge resource of knowledge, inspiration for how we might build today, actually.
Okay, this is where I found the sources particularly fascinating, the role of rituals and beliefs. How did that shape the buildings?
Right, this is crucial. In many traditional Indonesian societies, rituals weren't just, ceremonies. They were ways to pass down knowledge.
Knowledge about the environment?
Yes, practical knowledge about building, about living sustainably, but it was often wrapped up in symbolic actions, stories, and crucially, embedded in their architecture.
So the building itself is part of the belief system.
Absolutely. There's a really deep connection between their worldview, whether Hindu, Buddhist, indigenous beliefs, and how they design spaces.
Bali comes up a lot in the sources as a prime example.
It's a perfect example. Balinese architecture is just completely interwoven with their spiritual and cultural life. It dictates almost everything.
Like what specifically?
Well, the design concepts, how spaces are organized. Take the principle of Trihata Karana.
Okay, what's that?
It's about harmony between humans, nature, and the divine. And this philosophy directly impacts building orientation, the layout inside, which materials they choose, even the decorative details. It's all about creating balance.
And it goes beyond just one house, right? The whole community setup.
Yes, exactly. The idea of imago mundi, the house, or sometimes the whole village, as a kind of miniature cosmos.
A map of the universe.
Sort of, yeah. Representing their understanding of the universe and their place in it. So a home isn't just shelter. It's a symbolic space for rituals, for honoring ancestors.
Like the Dayak longhouses mentioned.
That sacred central space they often have believed to connect different realms. The architecture literally embodies their spiritual and social world. Builders were consciously putting their cosmology into the structure.
That's deep. It's not just decoration then.
Not at all. It influenced layout based on social structure, the perceived flow of cosmic energy, that kind of thing.
Okay, so incredibly rich culturally, but also super practical, dealing with the Indonesian climate. Tropical humid. That's tough to build for.
It really is. And the vernacular architecture shows amazing cleverness in adapting to high heat, high humidity, strong sun, those seasonal winds.
One thing you see everywhere in the pictures is buildings on stilts.
Yes. Stilt construction, or rumah panggung. Super common, and for very good reasons.
What are the main benefits?
Well, several big ones. First, lifting the living space protects from flooding, which is common in many areas, especially near coasts and rivers.
Makes sense.
Second, it creates amazing ventilation. Air flows freely underneath, cooling the floor above. Really vital in that sticky heat.
Ah, natural air conditioning.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And third, it keeps ground moisture and pests, termites, away from the main structure. Helps the building last longer, keeps it healthier.
Okay, that covers the stilts.
Yeah.
What about those dramatic roofs we see, often really steep?
Yes, the steeply pitched roofs, often with big overhangs, also very functional.
For rain, I guess.
Primarily, yes. The steep slope sheds that heavy tropical rainfall really fast, prevents leaks and water damage. And the large eaves, they throw deep shade over the walls and openings.
Keeping the sun out.
Exactly. Keeps the interior spaces significantly cooler. It's a simple, brilliant design for dealing with both sun and monsoons. Modern flat roofs often struggle with that kind of rain without complex drainage.
And the materials, lots of wood, bamboo, thatch. Feels very natural.
Right, and that choice is very deliberate too. These natural materials, wood, bamboo, thatch, have low thermal conductivity.
Meaning they don't transfer heat easily.
Correct, so they help keep the heat out. Plus, builders carefully consider the building's orientation, its size, to maximize breezes and minimize direct sun.
And openings, windows, vents.
Strategic placement, openings in walls, sometimes even gaps near the roof ridge, all designed to encourage cross-ventilation, pulling air through the building, cooling things down, reducing humidity.
It's really sophisticated passive design. And unlike concrete and steel.
Much lower carbon footprint, locally sourced, less processing energy. Hugely important today.
Okay, so climate adaptation is key. But Indonesia is also in the ring of fire, right? Earthquakes and other hazards. How did they deal with those risks?
Another area of incredible traditional knowledge. In earthquake zones, like West Sumatra with the Rumah Gadang.
The one with the curved roof.
That's the one. They used flexible timber joints, often without any nails.
No nails. How does that help?
It lets the whole structure flex and sway when the ground shakes. Instead of rigidly resisting and potentially breaking, it moves with the quake. Reduces the chance of collapse massively.
Wow.
And they often sit on large foundation stones, which also help absorb the seismic energy, the shaking from the ground.
Any other examples?
The Javanese joglo houses also have flexible wooden frames. And generally, using lightweight materials, wood, bamboo is a big advantage in quakes. Lighter buildings exert less force when they shake.
Smart. What about floods or volcanoes?
Well, the stilts we talked about are the obvious flood defense in coastal and river areas, just lifting the living space above potential water levels.
Right.
And near volcanoes, you sometimes see a preference for smooth, lightweight roofing. Helps stop heavy volcanic ash from building up, which could cause a roof to collapse under the weight.
It's really impressive how these principles are adapted so specifically region by region. The sources mention comparing Sundanese and Banjar houses.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. The Sundanese Ima Pangong, often in the cooler highlands of West Java, versus the Banjar Lanting house, built along rivers in South Kalimantan.
So what's similar? What's different?
Both often use stilts and gable roofs responses to the general tropical climate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Ima Pangong might be positioned to catch more sun in the cooler hills, while the Lanting house's orientation is all about river access, which is vital there. Material details might differ too. Maybe the Banjar house uses zinc roofing traded along the river, while the Sundanese stick closer to traditional thatch.
Subtle but important tweaks.
Exactly, based on microclimate, resources, and culture. It shows how adaptive these traditions are.
And these styles aren't static, they evolve over time too, like the Javanese houses.
Definitely. Early Javanese houses, including the joglo type, often had raised floors and saddle roofs, good for floods and ventilation. But over time, maybe materials changed, society changed, they started building more on the ground. Different roof shapes even came to signify social status.
So they adapt to social shifts as well.
Yes, and even the joglo. Once for the elite, you now see its principles adapted in modern homes in coastal cities, blending tradition with new needs.
The sources also mention Balinese village layouts and the Karampuang community.
Right. The Balinese village, like Pengotan, shows that spatial layout reflecting Hindu beliefs, sacred zones versus everyday zones.
Yeah.
That organization is a key regional thing.
And Karampuang.
In South Sulawesi, yeah. Their dwelling traditions changed over time, from communal houses called likang to ritual houses, laopol, to modern homes, bola. It shows architecture responding to social and environmental changes, but still holding on to core symbolic meanings. It's a living tradition.
All of this just screams sustainability, doesn't it? These inherent principles.
Absolutely. It's baked right in, using local natural materials that cuts down transport energy, processing energy massively.
And the climate-responsive design.
Means less need, or no need, for artificial heating or cooling. Huge energy savings. Plus, traditional techniques often create really durable buildings that last generations. Less waste,
There was that specific example of a closed energy cycle. Humagantun Buntoy.
Yes, in central Kalimantan, a beautiful example. Their building is tied to managing the forest, sustainably planting replacements for harvested trees.
Wow.
Even using wood ash from clearing land as fertilizer. Using local materials cuts costs and impact. The house design itself provides thermal comfort naturally, no AC needed.
And how it sits on the land.
They adapt to the contours, often using foundations like the Kalangwilan that barely disturb the soil. Minimal impact. Simple, functional forms, maximizing space, minimizing materials. Even the decoration is usually functional and beautiful.
And that space underneath the stilts?
Right, that semi-public communal area for working, socializing, super efficient use of the whole structure really makes you think about sustainable living models from the past.
It really does. Which brings us to the flip side, the challenges of modernization, the tension there.
Yeah, it's a big issue. There's pressure from global architectural trends, which can clash with maintaining local identity.
And the shift to modern materials, concrete, metal.
Right, sometimes seen as cheaper or easier, but often totally unsuited to the tropical climate. They can trap heat, making interiors uncomfortable, leading to more energy use for air conditioning.
A vicious cycle.
Exactly. And we're losing the traditional building knowledge, the craft skills, as modern methods take over. Plus, those global styles just might not work well in Indonesia's environment.
Are there other pressures beyond just materials and styles?
Oh, sure. Things like land becoming scarce and expensive in cities makes bigger traditional layouts difficult.
Right.
There's the influence of media, making Western-style modern buildings seem more desirable, maybe more prestigious.
Keeping up appearances.
Sort of. And economically, traditional craft can struggle to compete with mass-produced modern components if cost is the only factor. It's complex culture versus economics versus practicality.
So, given all that, what's the way forward? How can we learn from this vernacular wisdom for contemporary design?
There's huge potential. We absolutely should be looking at integrating those passive cooling strategies again. They just work.
Like the roofs and ventilation.
Yes. Traditional roof shapes for rain and shade are still incredibly relevant. Adapting stilts for flood zones or ventilation, it just makes sense. Thinking hard about building orientation for sun and breeze, that should be standard practice.
And materials.
Championing local sustainable materials like timber and bamboo, supporting the local skills to work with them.
And drawing inspiration from the styles themselves.
Definitely. The spatial layouts, the symbolism, the aesthetics, we can learn from those to create buildings that feel rooted, culturally meaningful, not just generic boxes.
So involving the communities.
Crucial. Engaging with local people, traditional builders, ensures that knowledge isn't lost and that new designs actually meet local needs and respect traditions. And resilience, adapting those earthquake and flood-resistant ideas, that has to be a priority.
It really forces a rethink of relying purely on technology when these elegant, nature-based solutions are right there.
Exactly.
Okay, this has been incredibly illuminating, a real deep dive. So wrapping up, what are the main takeaways, the core principles we've pulled out?
I think it's that really profound connection between culture and environment you see in these buildings. Their built-in sustainability and resilience honed over centuries.
Yeah.
And just the sheer stunning diversity across Indonesia, offering this wealth of very specific, very valuable lessons for how we build now.
Right. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Even if you're not in Indonesia, how can we in our own places learn from this? From building in harmony with our environment, our culture, thinking about that wisdom of adapting locally, using resources wisely, building for the long term. Principles found in traditional practices everywhere, really.
Absolutely. And this conversation, it's just scratching the surface. Definitely check out the sources we provided if you want to go deeper.
Or explore vernacular architecture closer to home.
Yeah. There's so much to learn from how people have built thoughtfully and sustainably for centuries all over the world.